Hi, church family. I am in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and wanted to tell you a little bit about how life is here and what my church going experience has been like. So it's funny because I actually went to church for the first time today, and it was a Catholic church, which obviously First Congregational is not, so that was different just to begin with. But there are some things that were very much the same. For example, as I was sitting in my pew, there weren't very many people there. I got there a little bit early, and the woman who was up at the front of the church came back and sat down next to me and said in Spanish, "I'm sorry to bother you, but would you mind doing the second reading today?" And I don't mind, I should clarify, I don't mind reading at home. I actually kind of like it, although I shouldn't say that because then I'm going to get hooked into doing it every Sunday. But doing the reading in a completely different language for a congregation that doesn't speak English is a little bit scarier than doing it at home. So my first reaction was, well, I don't read Spanish that well. And she, of course, won't take no for an answer. And she says, well, that's okay. And she handed me the program, you don't call it a program, the bulletin, and said, well, just read this first part. So I started reading, and she goes, oh, you'll be just fine. And I was like, great. So sure enough, I got to go up and read the second lesson in Spanish to a Spanish congregation, which was pretty ridiculous, but not. I didn't die. I'm still here. So that was pretty funny. And then other things that are the same, at one point we did Passing the Peace, which obviously took place in Spanish, but it's a great way to connect with people because, it's just shaking hands and doing the kisses on the cheek, and a lot of people would just wave to each other. So the woman who had dragged me into doing the reading waved at me from the front of the church, peace, and I said peace back, and so in that sense, service is still very much the same. The people are still the same and very friendly and accepting and wonderful. So things that I noticed that were different about communion specifically, I obviously didn't take it, but I only saw them do the bread. There was a cup for the wine, but it was empty, and no wine was taken during communion. So that was very interesting. And then the other interesting, I guess, different part of the service was at the very end, everyone sort of flooded to the front of the church, which I didn't know what was going on, so I just sort of stayed in the pew. And I don't know what you call them, the pastor, minister, bishop person, came down with a bowl full of water, and he had kind of a little sponge type thing that he soaked in the water and then baptized everyone again, and they made the sign of the cross, and then they fled out of the church. So as soon as not as soon, but I started realizing that people were leaving and I was going to be stuck being the last one, so I kind of headed out as well. But it was a very different sort of experience, from the standpoint of it being a Catholic service, but also from the standpoint of it being in a completely different language. I felt lost for a lot of it, but also there were those moments where, we were all connecting and talking, or not talking, but, connecting with each other through the course of the service, and it was kind of neat, honestly, to get to be a part of it. So that's one bit. I also wanted to talk just briefly about a couple of memories I have of communion. One is during high school with the First Congregational Senior High Youth Group, we went to Colorado and for a mission trip. And in the course of that mission trip, one of the things we did was to serve both dinner and communion to a group of homeless men. And I remember going into it thinking, I am a high school student. What am I supposed to offer these people? I don't understand what I'm doing here. And over the course of communion and the course of the meal, you're just able to have conversation, and that was one of the first memories I had where it was just like, wow, communion is a really powerful thing to be able to share with people. Because we were able to then sit down and talk with these men and hear their stories, and it was a really moving experience. So that was one. And then the other, I think some of my favorite memories of communion are from Camp Talahi, where I attended every summer, I think, since first grade. So if any of you, well, for those of you who haven't been to Camp Talahi, communion is pretty typically taken on Vesper Hill, which obviously is a hill. that's all grassy and surrounded by trees, and there is, I guess to quote the song, sort of a rugged cross right behind a stone altar, and we would all sort of group up and get together and take communion there. And we didn't always have a whole lot. Like, we'd have Kool-Aid and a loaf of white bread, and that would be communion, but it was still just the act of being there with all of my fellow campers that, we didn't know each other the first day of camp, and by the end we were all best friends. And I think a lot of finding that connection with each other had to do with being able to share communion, and being in that place and feeling very, very connected to God and my spirituality. So that was a really neat thing. So I hope you enjoyed those stories. I was so excited to get to be a part of the service today, and I miss you all and hope things are well. So, bye. 3.